Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review for the weekend of August 12th through the 14th, 2018. I will walk through the top 10 of the box office for the weekend. I will touch upon some limited releases, and then we will look ahead to what's coming up over the next few weeks at the box office. Let's dive into the weekend's top 10. Coming in at number one, these numbers are hot off the press as always. Number one is Venom this weekend with $35.7 million, a 55% drop here. So that's a pretty good drop. I was expecting a 60 plus drop. Probably I was in my gut saying like 65, 67. I thought it was going to be pretty steep. Just because the word of mouth, I guess the critical reception to this film was bad, right? Very bad. The word of mouth in terms of cinema score and stuff like that was okay. Anything we saw online in terms of Rotten Tomatoes score from audiences was okay. It wasn't nearly as bad as the critical sort of slaying of this film, or gutting would probably be a better word. So the thought process here was last weekend it popped off. Probably felt like it was going to be front loaded. You had a holiday weekend essentially because it was Columbus Day, although Columbus isn't really a huge holiday, or now it'll probably shift. By the time I'm dead, it'll be called Indigenous Peoples Day and people won't remember what Columbus Day was. Hopefully that would be for the best. So it was a holiday weekend, so everything was sort of pointing towards it being a little bit sort of hyped and popped up or puffed up that weekend. So I was expecting a pretty high drop. It didn't drop that much. A 55% drop is kind of average for a normal movie. And to have Venom, which opened so high last weekend, based on expectation, take in $35.7 million in its second weekend, that's pretty freaking good. The question is, okay, now where is Venom going? It's going to break. It's at 142 now. It looks like it will cruise to $200 million, which I think was not expected to me, because when it opened at 80, I was like, oh, okay, this opened huge, and now it's going to like basically crater like a lot of comic book movie films that aren't really good. And I say that pretty, like, I don't mean to be dismissive of the film, but when critics, and I've read most of the reviews, I haven't seen it yet, so when I do see it, I'll probably post a review on Medium. I'm starting to write a lot more on Medium, so check that out if you will. I'm gonna hype that a few times in the show. I haven't seen it, but critics hate it, and it's not even just it's okay, it's middling. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen type situation, and so I think it's an absolute production mess. But that doesn't necessarily translate over to the general audiences. General audiences here are pretty excited about it. There's a specific group of people, probably younger men under 30, who are enjoying this film a lot, and they are showing up. So that's what matters in terms of its business. Now, in terms of the multiplier and stuff, normally you would think that because there's a sort of critical backlash to it, and because the word of mouth is not like an A+ cinema score or anything like that, you're thinking probably 2x for Venom, but I think it's gonna blast past that. It's already at 142. So a 2x multiplier would be at 160. Yeah, it's gonna blast through 160, probably on its way to $200 million, maybe low 200s for Venom. And that's a big win for Sony. I think Sony just passed the $1 billion mark for the first time since 2014 in a single year. So they're doing okay this year. A lot of that was Jumanji earlier in this year, January, February. But Sony's doing fantastic this year. A decent turnaround from what's been going on before with them. Obviously, since The Hack, that was probably winter of 2013. I can't remember, or 2014. God, it seems so long ago. They've really struggled a lot and had a lot of duds. But Venom is a very big win for them. And I don't know what this is going to do to the MCU universe now. Like, what's going to go on with that? Like, is Sony going to keep making their own sort of story world with Spider-Man, and then it's going to like cross over to MCU? I had always thought that Spider-Man Homecoming was going to be the last, and this is me being ill-informed probably, or uninformed, that Sony Spider-Man Homecoming was going to be the last sort of Sony thing. with MCU and Spider-Man. I thought that it was making an actual shift over to Disney and Marvel, but I could have been totally wrong about that. It just didn't seem like the Sony Spider-Verse was long for this world. It felt like a kind of an afterthought. And that's why I thought Venom wasn't going to do all that well. But this performance does change the picture a little bit. It makes sense now that the Spider-Verse is going to stay at Sony, and they're going to continue to make more than just the Spider-Man films. And Venom, there's probably in 2021, there's probably going to be a Venom 2, maybe 2020 if they can rush it. So this is going to stick around. So this performance isn't just, oh, hey, it's pretty good. It's sort of surprising. It's like, hey, it's going to change the business of filmmaking in terms of comic book movies a little bit. So it has a bigger significance than just making some cash. So where's it going to go? I think it's going to have steeper drops next week. Next weekend, I would think at least a 60% drop with Halloween coming out. I feel like Halloween's going to do fantastic. I feel like maybe $50 million, $60 million opening weekend, but I could be totally wrong. I have no idea. I have not been able to read that film all that well, but what I do know is it's going to do pretty well, and that audience is going to take a big bite out of Venom's third weekend audience. So great second weekend for Venom. I don't think it's going to last until next weekend. I'm expecting a much steeper drop, but we're looking at probably $200 million from Venom, so we should expect that it's going to stay in the Spider-Verse, and we're going to see some sequels out of it. So it's kind of a big deal. So that was number one. It beat out A Star Is Born, which came in at $28 million for the weekend. A phenomenal 35% drop. Per theater average was $7,500 in its second weekend. This one sits at $94 million total so far. There was some craziness this week where Venom was really starting to drop off in the weekdays, and A Star Is Born just wasn't. It was sticking around. And on Thursday, I believe it was the first day ever that A Star Is Born beat Venom in the daily numbers. So there was some thought going into this weekend that A Star Is Born would somehow leg it out versus Venom, but Venom didn't drop enough for that to happen. The young men sort of showed up to see that one. A Star Is Born, as I talked about last week, is skewing much, much older and more female. Any movie that plays to an older audience, and when I say old, I mean anybody over 30. When a movie spikes in that audience, and especially when it spikes in like over 50-year-olds, it tends to have really great legs and plays over and over for a very long term at the box office. And A Star Is Born is going to be that way. I feel like a 4x, 5x multiplier is almost a given here. I think it could easily get to $200 million because it was released at almost the perfect time. I'll give you the counterexample is First Man, where it's like they're coming out early October, right? Award season really starts kind of in the end of October and into November. And that's when you get those sort of platform art house releases that are vying for awards attention. That's why they're getting released then, because the nominations for the Oscars are announced in January. That means voting takes place, I want to say, in December. So that's why you get Oscar bait films coming out at the end of the year, because voting takes place at the end of the year. The nominations hit in January, and the show's usually late February. It's a big deal for studios. Despite people always say, oh, the Oscars don't matter. They matter a ton within the industry. What people mistake, it's like there's two different viewpoints of the Oscars. There's people inside the industry and there's people outside the industry. Outside the industry, we're all sort of just like spectators at a sporting game. Right. And to the Oscars, the industry people, it's like you're playing baseball and you're on the field. And that it's just a very different sort of vibe to it and perspective. It's really important inside the industry. And, let's say A Star Is Born, now Bradley Cooper, and let's say he gets even if he gets nominated for Best Director, that's a massive milestone for him in his career and anybody associated with him in his career. His agent, anybody he's close to, that all elevates their profiles pretty dramatically. And Bradley Cooper's now, if he gets nominated, I guarantee he's going to have huge projects coming his way over the next couple of years. So it is a big deal. That's why they put him out at the end of the year. That's why there's this big rush. But if you put him out too early, there was a potential here that Star is Born was coming out too early, would be forgotten by the time voting happened in December and January. That's not going to happen now because it popped off so well on its opening weekend and has been playing fantastically through the weekdays and now in its second weekend that it's gonna stick around at least to the end of November at the multiplex. So it will have a slot at the movie theater. If it can stick it out through December, I mean, this thing is just gonna print money at that point. Most movies take in about 85 to 90% of their box office in the first 4 weeks. That's your average film. The bigger sort of the movie it is, it kind of inches up to like 90, 91%. A movie like this, it's going to be fantastic in its seventh weekend and eighth weekend. It's really long for this world. And so the performance here it's kind of, the drop is phenomenal, but it's as expected based on what we saw during the weekdays. And I think its financial performance is only going to help its awards contention. Original song, maybe best director, best film, maybe, possibly. Is it still expanded? I think it is still expanded. I can't remember. But I think the awards possibilities for A Star is Born is just getting bigger and bigger as it does better and better at the box office over these weeks. Okay, so those were number 1 and number 2, both holdovers. Number 3 this weekend was First Man. And so this is kind of a head scratcher to me. You have Damien Chazelle as the director here, who is coming off of La La Land, which is just like a monumental movie. Sure, it made a lot of money and it almost won Best Picture, or lost out to Moonlight in that really embarrassing and awkward moment at the Oscars. But you had a musical that was a real throwback to like the 1950s and 60s classic Hollywood that you think it's going to play well in New York, Los Angeles, but ended up playing well across the United States and Canada. It was a huge win for Damien Chazelle. It was a movie that he worked on for many years. He wrote and directed that. Before that, he did Whiplash. So this is his third sort of major movie here coming out. And it looked like the stars were aligned, pun intended. You have Ryan Gosling, who is maybe not like the super A-list actor like The Rock is or something like that, but like he is very beloved in this country, and everybody seems to have a really positive attitude and opinion of Ryan Gosling, and he's in a lot of great movies. Obviously, he was in La La Land, but like he was in Nice Guys recently. He was in Blade Runner. He is an actor who is pretty versatile, despite the fact that people attack him for being kind of like stone-faced and not showing a lot of emotion, which is also a criticism of this film. He's a very versatile actor. And so you get Damien Chazelle coming off of La La Land, the high of his young career so far, also a high for Ryan Gosling. And you have him in one of the most American stories ever, landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong. It's a huge, massive, significant story in American history, maybe one of the most important, maybe the most important story in American history. And so you have all these things coming in. Claire Foy plays counter to Ryan Gosling. She's wonderful in The Crown. She's wonderful in this. The critics love it. It's got an 88% in Rotten Tomatoes. Why does it only do $16.5 million at the box office this weekend? Only $4,500 per theater average. That's with a production budget of about $60 million, with a really hefty marketing budget on this. So what happened here? So like I said, 88% in Rotten Tomatoes from critics, so they really enjoyed this film. Even more telling to me is the 8.1 out of 10 actual score. Rotten Tomatoes obviously is, did you like it or not? But then they actually give it a percentage, each critic, and that score was 8.1 out of 10. That is really high. So critics loved it. That's objective. There's no more argument there. Audiences had a little bit of a different perspective here. B+ on Cinema score for First Man. That's not great. Stuff like similar films like Gravity or The Martian. Gravity did A- at Cinema Score. Martian did A. You would want First Man to be in that category. It's supposed to be an artistic film. It's supposed to be really good. So you're thinking that audiences are really going to love it. That was not the case here. B plus cinema score. Also, 79% positive score on post track. Now, what does that mean? A positive score on post track essentially groups two categories together. It groups I really loved it and I thought it was pretty good. Those are grouped together into the positive score. A score of a 79 is okay, just like a B plus is okay, but it does not speak to it breaking out at all. You would need a score probably in the 85 plus range, something like I saw a movie that broke out last year, like It had like, I want to say high 80s, 86, 88, somewhere in that range as a positive post-track score. First Man's, it's below that breakout zone, both with its cinema score and its post-track score. So, what happened here? It's already time to do postmortems. Maybe it's a little bit early. Films like this tend to have really good legs. It's an awards contention film. They want it to play for 2 months at least in the movie theaters. I don't know. We'll see how the drop goes next weekend, but this is not looking great right now. It's, to me, what's most concerning about this is that this is that $4,500 per theater average also includes IMAX, which is really expensive. How much is the IMAX ticket? Like $20-25, something like that, something crazy. That was 33% of this revenue here was IMAX, which is a really high percentage. So even with that IMAX bump, it's only doing $4,500 per theater. Something happened here, and I think I know what it is. Despite the fact you have all these great elements involved with the acting, writing, and directing, and having a good big studio backing this thing, and really giving Damien Chazelle kind of free reign, there was some conflict here about the runtime. Like it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. I know Universal wanted to get that cut down a bit. They said, no, let's let him do his thing. Let's let him run with this and get the film that this fantastic director who's proven himself on Whiplash and La La Land, that he has great vision and great taste. Let's let him do his thing. That might have not been the best path here because audiences are lukewarm who saw it. My bigger concern is this. Let's say, like, I'm going to do some math here. The average ticket's about $10 in the United States and Canada. So, but this one had a lot of IMAX. So you would expect, like, if it was a $10 average ticket buy, you're looking at 1.6 million people who saw this. Because it's skewed, that's going to be skewed down because the IMAX is more expensive and opening weekend's a little bit more expensive for a lot of these movies. People are going to see it. So I'd say it's like 1.4 million people saw this movie this weekend. I'm more concerned with like the 350 million people that didn't see it. Why didn't they show up? Like, obviously the people that showed up are already sort of bought into the idea of the film. And so why they weren't ecstatic about it, but why didn't all these other people show up? Why didn't 2 million people show up to this? And I think to me, that's a little bit more concerning. And what I point to there is the marketing. The marketing made this look like a very kind of boring, paint by the numbers biopic, which are just, they're not interesting. And it didn't really have, you can compare it to, and I think Deadline did this and other people compare it to Sully, right? Like Clint Eastwood, Tom Hanks. You have a great director. I'll put that in quotations. I don't really like Clint Eastwood as a director. A wonderful star like Tom Hanks, real life heroism. There are a lot of parallels there. Sully did better. Why? Well, I think Clint Eastwood has a bigger sort of name in American cinema, just with like sort of your general audiences. Do a lot of people know who directed La La Land? Probably not. So that's maybe one reason there. The quality of the films, I've seen Sully like 100 times. I don't know why it's always on TV. I find it somewhat interesting. But I'm more interested in how terrible that movie is and how awful the editing is and the writing is, and how Tom Hanks tries to act his way out of every scene and it just doesn't work. It's like, to me, one of the paradigm train wrecks of modern cinema. So I watch it constantly. But people in middle America and general audiences loved that movie and they showed up for it. So why did they show up for Sully and not for First Man? And I think a lot of it has to come down to, did the marketing lie? Did the marketing mischaracterize this movie as being much more boring than it is? I don't know, because the reviews that I've read have, the critics love it, but critics have a higher attention span and they have a film vocabulary and this massive context that they bring to every single movie that they see. When they see a movie, they're constantly comparing it to other movies and contextualizing it within the medium of film. The average general audience person does not do that. They may do it on like a 10% level versus the 100% level of the film writer. So I think that this was probably a film made for film nerds and film snobs, which I would count myself as 100%. It was not made for general audiences. And I think the marketing tried to do its best to play up the sort of general audience. Let's get them excited. Let's hook them in. But I don't think it's there in the film. I just don't think that it's there. And I think, people, I don't know. It seems like with a movie like this, historical film, I always like go back to like Forrest Gump. Like Forrest Gump is the perfect example of a movie that has historical elements, that is this broad sweeping kind of like fake biopic, but was so engaging for the general audiences that it was like catnip for Americans. And it played up certain parts of the character, certain parts of history. It certainly glossed over a lot of the historical events in that film. First Man does not seem to do that. First Man seems to be a very almost cold, sterile look at Neil Armstrong and the moon landing, and I don't know how well that was ever going to play with audiences. So when I point to like what's the fatal flaw here, I actually don't think it was the marketing quality or quantity at all. There was a ton of marketing for this. We were inundated with it over the last couple of weeks, and they're on all the talk shows and all that kind of stuff. I don't even necessarily think it was the product quality. I think it's a really good film see to what critics are saying and their scores. And I've read through a lot of these reviews. They really like this film. I think it was the product conception. I think that Damien Chazelle made an art house film about the moon landing for film critics and film, I'm going to say elitists. I'm going to say that. I hate that term, but I really do feel like that might be the case here. Which is great for people like me who love film and watch film and study film, but it's not great for someone in Omaha who just worked a really long week and wants to go to see a movie and escape. He doesn't want to see, or she doesn't want to see, a kind of like really plotting, serious take on Neil Armstrong. They don't want to see that. And so I think, from my artistic hat is like, oh, this is a cool movie. It's great. I'm going to see it probably multiple times. The sort of business perspective is like, what were you thinking? Like, why did you think this was going to do well? Now, maybe they should have released it in November. Maybe they should have released it in December so that it was seen as, hey, this is an awards movie and not an October sort of action space film. Like I think it is being advertised as. So I think there's a little bit of problem there, but I think it's going to be a swing and a miss as a box office hit movie here. It's just not going to work. And we'll see how it does over the next couple of weeks in terms of its multiplier and all that. I'd say baseline multiplier is 4x. So that would put it at at least 65-ish. I think it hits 70 pretty easily. But I don't see it breaking out after that. Now, I could be totally wrong. Because the per theater average is so low its opening weekend, maybe this thing disappears. Maybe it fails to hit 60. That's a possibility too. We'll keep an eye on that. But that was my little deep dive on First Man, coming to number 3 with 16.5 million. I would say a very disappointing number for that movie. The expectation there was at least 20. Okay, so number 4 this weekend was Goosebumps 2 Haunted Halloween, 16.2 million for the weekend, a $4,600 per theater average, which was strong. Now the problem here was only $35 million production budget. Obviously, the centerpiece of the original was Jack Black playing R.L. Stine. He's not back for this one. And so Sony had a little bit of a hurdle here to get people to come out to this. But I think it was, it's almost beating First Man. So that's something. And I think the opening isn't really all that bad. Just within the context of Jack Black not being involved. There's an expectation here this thing was going to be like low teens and kind of peter out just because it doesn't have him playing the lead. But I think it's going to do okay. I think B Cinema Score is not good though. And so the first had an A Cinema Score. So that's the only thing here that really would make me nervous if I was Sony, is that the people that came to go see it didn't really like it all that much. But it's Halloween. We got 2 weeks to Halloween at least. So it's going to play strong for the next 2 weeks. It's a children's film. So you're looking at probably a similar number, at least a 3x 48.50. It's at least going to hit $50 million. So I think that's an okay performance for Goosebumps 2. I think there was an expectation that it could like super bomb, and that's what I was seeing in terms of the chatter. But that's not going to happen here. So a pretty decent performance. Number 5 this weekend was Smallfoot, with a great 35% drop. $9.3 million for the weekend, $2,500, almost $2,600 per theater. Total take so far for Smallfoot is $57.6 million in its third weekend. Good performance of that, great drop. Warner Brothers is going to be happy with this. 57 so far in its third weekend for a movie that had like next to zero buzz going for it. You cannot complain. Number 6 was Night School from Universal, $8 million. Also a good drop, 35% drop. Per theater average was $2,900 in its third weekend. Total take so far for Night School is $59, almost $60 million for Night School in its third weekend. That too is an okay performance. I think the expectation of Night School was about this. It had a pretty steep drop last weekend that I don't think Universal was all that happy about. 54% drop. It wasn't like 60, so that's not the end of the world. Did 27 opening weekend, 12 last weekend, 8 for this weekend. Those are pretty okay drops, especially this weekend. And I think that, I think Universal's going to be happy with that. Where's it going to end up as a multiplier? I mean, 27, I don't know. Like, you're thinking at least maybe a 3x, 81. That kind of seems high, actually, now that I look at the numbers. Probably ends up in the mid-70s, somewhere in there. So a good performance overall for Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish in that comedy. Number 7 was Bad Times at the El Royale. So this is a new movie from Drew Goddard, who did Cabin in the Woods. This is from Fox. It is kind of a strange noir period piece. John Hamm, Dakota Johnson, a whole sort of huge cast here. Also long running time, 2 hours, 21 minutes. So what happened here? $7.2 million for the weekend, a per theater average of $2,500 in an opening weekend. That is a disaster for a major film from a major studio. Now, major film might be a stretch here, but it's coming from Fox. It's not Fox Searchlight. It's not an art film per se. They expected this to play wide. That's why they put it in 2,800 theaters. And it basically crashed and burned pretty much immediately. Critics thought 73% Rotten Tomato score, which is okay. Cinema score is a B-, which is horrifically bad and terrible. Audiences hated this movie. And I caught a little bit of it. I won't tell you how I caught a little bit of it, but it was out there. It's very strange. It's a strange film that's kind of slow. It's a little bit of a trudge. And, let's do this really quick. Was the marketing there? There was some marketing there. I don't feel like the marketing buy for this was big enough to do a wide release. Wasn't there. Marketing quality, I saw a couple of the trailers. It's okay. Nothing really that interesting or not enough hook there, I would say. Product quality, product conception. Product quality looks okay. It doesn't look like it was a total disaster, but it doesn't look like it was a home run. It's messy, but it is interesting and engaging. It's Drew Goddard here. Like, he did Cabin in the Woods. He knows how to keep your attention in a film, even if it's long and kind of like very meta, which this movie is. In terms of product conception here, and this is sort of like before you make the movie, before you shoot a single scene, what are you trying to accomplish with this movie? What's the audience? What's the release strategy? I think here's where Fox really screwed up. I have heard that they decided to do this movie to keep Drew Goddard kind of in the stable, so to speak, in the Fox studio family. It's kind of probably like one for you, one for us type situation, which is pretty common in Hollywood. This is one for Drew. Kind of go for it and do what you want to do with it. We'll give you 35 or 30 million bucks to do whatever you want to do. And he sort of did that. I think before this thing got shot, there's a couple of issues here. It's kind of, I would call it like meta noir. And noir has always been around. It's always been an interesting and vital part of filmmaking. That genre, that look, that style has always had a strong voice in filmmaking. And the problem is, though, we're in such a place now where noir is so established in all different genres. Like, there's just noir elements in like everything now, that it's hard to make a straightforward noir film where you live in that snow globe world of trench coats and heavy drinking and shadowy characters with multiple like all these different names and aliases, backgrounds and stuff. All the noir genre elements are here. The question is do audiences still react to those the same way? I don't think that they do at all, because noir has become so ingrained within filmmaking and movies in general. People don't necessarily pick them out as like, oh, this is a tip of the hat to this movie or that movie. They don't really see that anymore. And so I think we're way past the point of that with maybe it's like the genre maturation here. And we're way past that point where that works. And so when you're doing a noir film, I look back to like Blade Runner 2049, which is like future noir or sci-fi noir. And you think about that, and that didn't work either. And so I kind of have to wonder if that whole genre or type of filmmaking or writing really needs like a Scream moment, where it needs just like this, like Brick. I thought Brick might have been that moment. What was that, like 14 years ago when Brick came out? I thought that might have been the moment for noir. It was like, we can still do this style of film, update it to now, and have it work. And it did work really well in that movie, I think. But it's never really caught on. And sort of, what's the last like mass appeal noir film that's come out? It's just like, so I think from a product conception, going meta noir here probably wasn't the best idea. Now, you could have still done it. And I think if you cut it down to 90 minutes and you made it a lot more, even like say, hey, I'm going to give you $15 million to make this instead of 30. You got to come in at 90 minutes and do whatever the F you want. And I want you to be experimental as possible and really push noir conventions in a lot of different ways. It could have worked as an art film and a platform release. But a wide release like this, there's nothing that indicates to me this was ever going to work. And so I think from a product conception standpoint, that's where this movie failed. There was no way you're going to do a stylish, strange, bizarre meta noir film like this and have it work on wide release. Never going to happen. So I think Fox screwed up on that one, sort of giving him a blank slate to do a wide release instead of a platform release, which is what he really should have been doing here. Okay, so that's Bad Times at El Royale. Terrible performance, awful, $2,500 per theater in its open weekend. Let's keep this train rolling. Number 8 was The House with the Clock on Its Walls, $3.9 million, 45% drop. That's okay. Eli Roth here directing this with Jack Black, we mentioned with the Goosebumps 2, not being in that, being in this instead. $1,400 per theater in its fourth weekend, $62 million so far in its fourth weekend. Pretty good performance. I think Universal's going to be happy with this. It didn't flop, but it didn't massively break out. I think it's just a straight kind of down the middle performance here that Universal I think will be happy with. And I think Eli Roth is really happy because now he's proven himself that he can make a movie like this for a big studio, so he's not stuck making Green Inferno again. So, which I'm sure that they love to make, but I'm sure he wants to make money. So number 9 was The Hate You Give. This is a big expansion for The Hate You Give here. It added 212 screens or theaters. Per theater average was $7,100. That's pretty good. I can't really wrap my head around that math there. We're only at 250 theaters, $7,000 per theater. It seems like it's pretty good. Obviously, it's not in the top 10, so that's a positive. Plus 245%, but that's because it added theaters. I don't know. I had to keep my eye on that one. I can't tell if that's 7. now that I'm thinking about it, $7K for that at only 250 theaters isn't really that fantastic. It could, as it expands out, that per theater average is probably going to keep dropping. And so let's say it goes to 1,000 theaters. What's that per theater average going to look like? Not good. 2,100, 2,200 maybe. So now that I look a little bit closer, I don't really think it's going anywhere, unfortunately, because apparently it's a very good movie. A Simple Favor coming at number 10, 1.3 million. Big drop, 60% drop, mostly because it lost 1,000 theaters this weekend. Per theater average is now below $1,950 per theater. That one's done. That's flatlining right now. That's in its fifth weekend. $52 million for A Simple Favor. That's a good performance, especially within the context of it not being marketed appropriately and kind of getting dumped on a weekend without a lot of support. Mid 50s for that is a great run for A Simple Favor. I think Paul Feig, Lionsgate, and everybody involved are going to be happy with that. Okay, so that's the top 10. Big takeaways are First Man flopped, Bad Times flopped, Goosebumps did okay. That's the big takeaway. Venom had a lot lower of a drop than most people expected, so it's going to stick around and have a higher multiplier than we thought, which lends itself to the Spider-Verse continuing at Sony and us having a Venom sequel here in the next 3 or 4 years. Star is Born, fantastic drop. It's going to play for a good month, probably 2 months, very strong, helps its award contention. That's going to end up, I think it's going to end up over $200 million, but I'm really bullish on that movie. Okay, so that was the top 10. What's happening outside the top 10? Anything to talk about? Anything to talk about at all? So limited releases, Colette from Bleecker Street. That is now, it added 486 theaters. It's now on about 600 theaters it's playing. Per theater average is $1,700. That's not going anywhere. Bleecker Street tried to push it out a little bit higher. Art film platform release, it's not working. Old Man and the Gun also had a big increase, 179 theater increase. That's sitting at $4,000 per theater in 230 theaters. That's okay, but probably doesn't look like it's going to break out all that much. Sisters Brothers. If you follow this sort of entertainment news and Variety and Deadline, all that kind of stuff, you might have seen some alarming stories about Annapurna Films. So Annapurna Films is Mega Ellison, Larry Ellison, I guess was the CEO or founder of Oracle. He's a billionaire. He's given a lot of money to his daughter Megan to start Annapurna as a distribution production studio. Kind of an odd way that it started, and she gets a lot of flack for that, but they have put out a lot of really interesting films, like last year's Detroit. And so they're a new kid on the block. They're trying to be an upstart here and make really great artistic films and push them out to wide audiences, and it never really works. The Sisters Brothers cost, I want to say like $30 million. It was not cheap to make that movie. No one's ever heard of it at all. It's playing in 129 theaters. It added 75 theaters. Nobody's seen it. It has a $2,000 per theater average on 129 theaters. I mean, like that's so bad. And so I think the CFO left. I think the CEO left this week. It sounds like the rumors that they don't have enough money to continue. A couple of their movies, I believe they're putting out Vice still, but that's kind of in trouble because if they're running out of cash, they can't pump $30-40 million into a marketing campaign or awards sort of season campaign, PR campaign for Vice. And there was the Fox News movie with Margot Robbie that was about to start shooting in 2 weeks. They just had to drop out. I think Focus Features took that over, luckily, for everybody involved. So what you have here is Annapurna's basically tail spinning, and it's in a nosedive financially. Now, Larry, her father, can come in and infuse $400 million like that. Like, it's not really the big deal to him. But anybody who makes a lot of money is usually a miser. And so I don't think he's going to just give her $100 million to continue. So my guess is that Annapurna may not be around in a year or so. Maybe they find a way. But I think it just very quickly, it was probably not the best idea, sort of their business model. Like A24 and Bleecker Street, especially A24, I hope that they're doing well. But they really have the indie platform release strategy down. They know how to pick filmmakers and movies that they want to promote and distribute. And they do it right, and they marketed them so well that they're one of the best upstarts that we have now. Neon is kind of in that range too. They're struggling a little bit more than I thought that they would. A24 is sort of like the top shelf paradigm of this right now. Annapurna has tried. They've tried really hard to get their movies out there. The release strategies honestly have not made a ton of sense to me. Detroit specifically, they tried to push that wide way too quickly. It's a very good and interesting, well, it's a good film. The last 30 minutes I thought was a mess, but it's a film that I can see playing very well to a lot of different groups of people, and maybe cut like 20 minutes out of it. It would be like really fantastic. But they try to push it out way too quickly. At the end of the day, they kind of don't know what they're doing in terms of release strategies and stuff like that. So they're trying a lot of different things, and none of it really stuck. And so now you have this like $30-40 million, The Sisters Brothers, that nobody's ever heard of. It's going to be a total write-down. It's not going to make any money. It's not going to have any awards contention because it's not making any money. It's like a worst-case scenario for them. So they're in trouble. And I think Sisters Brothers, maybe they just didn't have money to market it. I don't even know how good it is. I've read nothing about it. And I follow the film industry. So it's like, what happened? So that's doing terribly. One movie to note here, Beautiful Boy, from Amazon Studios. This was a big one in the fall movie festivals. I think it played last night, I want to say. Is it New York Film Festival season? I think it is. I think I might have played last night. This is Steve Carell, Timothée Chalamet. A lot of buzz. I think Steve Carell plays a drug addict, and Timothy's his son here. There's a lot of buzz to this. Amazon Studios. So how did it do opening weekend? It had typical New York, Los Angeles opening weekend in 4 theaters. It did $55K per theater, which is good. The buzz that I heard about this over the weekend as the numbers were coming in, it was like, this is the best per theater average of the year, blah, 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 blah. These numbers are very good for a limited release, but they're not that exciting to me. 70K, 80K per theater, that excites me. 100K per theater, I'm on board. I'm at the edge of my seat. 55K per theater is good, but it does not sort of say to me that this is going to break out in San Antonio or Omaha or Colorado Springs. Like, it doesn't have that vibe to it. And plus this is a movie that was going to pop off on the coastal cities anyways. So it's an okay performance. I think people are getting ahead of themselves with saying it's going to break out and do really well. 55K to me is not all that exciting. A couple other limited releases, Jane and Emma. I don't really know that one. Did $5,800 per theater, not very good. Happy Prince did $5,000 per theater, also not very good at all. Okay, so that's the limited release stuff I want to talk about. Let's see what else is going on. Let's see what's coming out over the next couple of weeks. It's going to get really exciting over the next couple of weeks. So next weekend we have Halloween. Now I'll talk briefly about what I think Halloween's going to do. I have been all over the map on this movie ever since it was announced. David Gordon Green, Danny McBride as writers, David Gordon Green directing, Jamie Lee Curtis is back, Judy Greer's in this. Who doesn't love Judy Greer? So this is the 10th movie in the series. It's the 3rd reboot. It basically ignores the other 8 films that came after Halloween, and this is supposed to be a direct sequel to the original 1978 John Carpenter Halloween. So already I'm very confused, and I love horror movies and I've seen all of the Halloween movies. I'm confused. Like, what? Now our audience is going to be that confused? I don't know. So at the beginning when this thing was announced, I was a little bit sort of, I don't know. I was not super keen on its performance. And then over the last month or so, it's like, oh, wait a second, I'm wrong about this. I'm misreading this film. It's going to do fantastic. Look what The Nun did. The Nun did $55 million opening weekend. That was a prequel to a prequel of The Conjuring. So like horror has never been at a better place right now. I actually wrote a whole feature on this that I put out this week on Medium. Check that out. It's just the Wildline podcast over at Medium. It's also on my Twitter. So I talk in depth about where horror's been over the last few years in terms of financial success and creative sort of output. It's never really been better in the history of horror films. We're really excited about a double golden age here. And so Halloween's coming out sort of the peak at the peak of these two golden ages sort of coming together here with Halloween in terms of sort of opportunity and potential. I don't know. Like, I could see it opening at 35. I could see it opening at 75. I just don't know how to read how audiences are going to react to this. My gut right now says that Venom did very well. And Venom did well enough where I feel like it could take the edge off of Halloween a little bit in terms of its opening weekends. If Venom had opened at like 50 and kind of had a big drop and people didn't like it as much as critics didn't like it, I could see Halloween popping off at 70, $80 million. But because Venom did well, I just think it takes that younger male audience a little bit out of the picture. Instead of being 100%, they're going to be like 80, 90% on Halloween. And so I feel like that's going to take maybe like $5-10 million off of what it's going to do. So I would predict $60 million, 55 to 60, let's say 50 to 60 in that range. I think is what it's going to do. But it's going to be big. It's going to be massive. It's going to play super well for the next 2 weeks through Halloween. And it's going to be a big win for Universal. It costs like $15 million to make. Now, the marketing here is probably outrageous. Blumhouse is involved. So that's why they kept that production budget so low. He's like basically like a Nazi with budgets. He will not let you go over. That's Jason Blum at Blumhouse. So it's going to be a huge win for Universal. David Gordon Green will probably be asked to come back. Probably Danny McBride to write again a sequel to this. I hope not. Like, I haven't seen it yet. I like the Halloween series. I think it's fun. But I'm just so over it by now. After the Rob Zombie stuff, I was just like, just put this thing to bed. Like, the original's still the best by far. No other Halloween film has ever come close to the original. This is not going to. I can guarantee you that. And I just wish they would end that series completely, just let it die. But that's probably never going to happen. It's Hollywood. Okay, so that's next weekend. The weekend after that, Hunter Killer comes out. Gerard Butler, submarine action film. I think that's going to do quite well. I don't know why. I saw the trailer. It just seems like a super paint by numbers action film, but people love that shit. They love Gerard Butler. Still gets people to come out. It's a submarine movie. It's action. When's the last time we had a really good submarine action movie? Not a long time. So I think it's going to do pretty well. Indivisible is also coming out. That is a Pure Flix Christian film. That'll probably do okay. Johnny English Strikes Again. Roland Atkinson, fucking Bean. Whatever. I don't think this is going to do anything. I don't even know why Universal is releasing this in the United States. I could be totally wrong. There could be a huge fan base for this. I doubt it. I think it's going to be awful wide release for Universal. And then we're in November. And just quickly in November, the first couple of weekends, Bohemian Rhapsody, that's tracking at like 35 now. The first tracking came out, I want to say it was 35, maybe 30. No, it's 35. So that's looking to be a really big boom for Fox. Nobody's Fool is also coming out from Paramount the first weekend. That is Tiffany Haddish, Takika Sumpter. That's from Tyler Perry. That could do pretty well, rated R comedy. The Nutcracker comes out from Disney. Nutcracker in the Four Realms with Keira Knightley, Morgan Freeman, Helen Mirren, and that one. So that's a really busy start in November. I feel like that used to be like the typical weekend. You'd have like two big films coming out, and then maybe like one that was sort of mid-tier. That hasn't been the case, I feel, at the box office for a long time. So that's going to be a really strong start to November. And then after that, we get Dr. Seuss the Grinch. That's the animation film coming out on November 9th. The Girl in the Shadow's Web, a new dragon tattoo story, also comes out on the 9th. And Overlord, which I feel like could do a lot better than people are thinking. J.J. Abrams produced World War II sci-fi movie, rated R horror. I'm going to go see that because it looks awesome. But I'm probably the target demographic for that as a horror nerd. So I feel like that could break it a little bit. It's actually a lot more of an exciting November than I had anticipated coming into the fall. And it doesn't stop. You got Fantastic Beasts, you got Widows, which I think is going to be a massive breakout hit. Calling it now. That was my big call from the fall movie preview. I was like, one movie I know is going to break out is Widows. It's just got such crossover appeal to it. And it's Viola Davis. Come on. And then Creed 2, Green Book, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Robin Hood. It's a really strong November, and it feels like this is coming off a strong October so far. We're 43% ahead of last October this year. It could be the best October ever, I believe. I think the record breaker may have been 2014. So it's a really exciting time at the box office. I'm excited about it. I hope you guys are too. I'll be back. I might do a Halloween. You know what? I'm going to do a Halloween preview show just because I want to, because I'm so psyched for that movie coming out. And then I'll be back next weekend. If you get a chance, check out my Medium post on horror films. I really appreciate it if you read it and maybe leave some comments. Thanks a lot, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.